Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rula Deeb. I'm a senior principal at Geosyntax Consultants in Oakland, California, and the coordinator of the webinar series on behalf of SERDP and ESTCP. I have the pleasure of facilitating today's event. This webinar features DoD-funded research efforts to survey and remediate unexploded ordnance, or UXO, at underwater sites. Dr. David Williams from the Applied Research Lab at Pennsylvania State University will discuss the development of algorithms to detect and classify UXO using sonar data. David will pause roughly halfway through his presentation to answer some questions, and we will conclude the webinar with a longer Q&A session. The next two slides provide instructions on optimizing your webinar experience. If you have not done so already, please download Zoom at the link shown here and provide it to you in your webinar registration confirmation email. If you're unable to download Zoom, you can still view the slides using a compatible internet browser such as Firefox, IE, or Edge, and by creating a free Zoom account. If you continue to have difficulties or if your screen freezes, try keying in Control and F5 to perform a hard refresh of your screen. Please note that you can download a PDF of the slides from the webinar webpage. The PDF is uploaded already, and then call into the conference line provided to you in your webinar registration confirmation email. Another way to view today's proceedings will be to go to the SERDP and ESTCP YouTube channel at the link shown here, as we've already started live streaming the webinar. Today's broadcast will be listen only. You can submit questions by using the Q&A box on your screen. You do not need to wait until the Q&A period to submit your questions. We do encourage you to get them in as soon as you think of them. And when you submit your question, we ask that you add your organization name at the end of the question so that we can identify it during the Q&A session. Please do not submit questions in the chat box. It is reserved for comments related to technical difficulties. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. David Bradley, who is the SERDP and ESTCP Program Manager for Munitions Response. Dr. Bradley's professional career includes U.S. Navy-supported research, lab directorship at the NATO Undersea Research Center in Italy, as well as research and academic activities at Penn State's Applied Research Lab. An emeritus professor of acoustics, he is currently a University of Washington Applied Research Lab staff member assigned to the SERDP and ESTCP Program Office. Dave is also a fellow of the American Acoustical Society and has chaired society committees and served as president. Dave, please proceed.
Thanks, Rula, and welcome everyone. The next few slides will provide a quick overview of both SERDP and ESTCP. Please, for the audience, get used to acronyms because we have a lot of them. SERDP and ESTCP are the Department of Defense's investments in the environment and installation energy science and technology. SERDP specifically is a strategic environmental research and development program established by Congress in the 1990s as a partnership between the DoD, the Department of Energy, and the Environmental Protection Agency. ESTCP is the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, in which we demonstrate and validate innovative environmental and installation energy technologies. The total program is much broader than unexploded ordnance response and cleanup, with a lot, as the audience might be not at all surprised, a great deal of attention nowadays in dealing with forever chemicals. SERDP and ESTCP fund and are responsible for applied research, development, testing, and evaluation projects for the DoD's top environmental and installation energy challenges. The program funds over 600 active projects. In 2023, we funded projects with 77 academic institutions, 91 federal performers, and 52 industry partners. The next webinar for MR is on July 25 of this year and will feature 2 of our projects on technologies for detecting underwater buried projects. Today's webinar is an excellent pairing with that upcoming presentation. You can find additional information about upcoming webinars at this link. All past webinars are archived and can be accessed. Back to Rula to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you so much, Dave. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Williams, who is an associate research professor in the Sensor Analysis and Data Modeling Department at ARL at Penn State. David's current research interests include the intersection of machine learning and underwater acoustics. Prior to joining ARL, he was a scientist in the Mine Countermeasures Division at the NATO Science and Technology Organization in Italy, where his work focused on sonar-based pattern recognition and algorithm development for autonomous underwater vehicles. David was recognized by becoming the recipient of a James B. Duke Graduate Fellowship and a National Defense Science and Engineering Graduate Fellowship. He also was awarded the Excellence in Review award by the IEEE Journal of Oceanic Engineering twice. And in terms of educational background, he received his bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in electrical and computer engineering from Duke University. David, we're delighted to have you. Please get us started with the technical portion of this webinar.
Okay, thank you, Rula, for that introduction, and thank you all for attending this webinar. So today I'm going to be highlighting some of the research we've done within the SERDP munitions response portfolio to address the problem of unexploded ordnance by combining technologies from the fields of deep learning and underwater acoustics. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge some of my collaborators who have generously provided data and support for this project. So sincere thanks goes out to Dan Brown at Penn State, Tim Marston and Kevin Williams at the University of Washington, and Ahmad Abawi at HLS Research. Okay, so in this talk, I'll start by explaining the problem we're tackling and what we're trying to accomplish. Then I'll describe the sensor data that we're working with before touching on some of the algorithms we're developing. About halfway through the talk, we'll pause for a brief Q&A session, as Rula mentioned. And after that, we'll speed up a bit when we get into the new sonar-specific deep learning algorithms that we've been working on. Then we'll show some example results on real-world data before wrapping up with some concluding remarks. And then we'll have another Q&A session at the end. So in the US alone, there are hundreds of aquatic sites spanning millions of acres that potentially contain unexploded bombs and munitions from past military activities. And this UXO regularly shows up in shallow waters where human interaction is likely and public safety is at risk. So in the top photo on the right here, there was a potential UXO that washed up on the beach near the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in North Carolina in 2020. And a few months before that, a snorkeler in Hawaii had discovered 2 100-pound bombs off Lanikai Beach on Oahu. And because it was dangerous to move them at that time, the Navy conducted a controlled detonation, which you see happening in the middle photo there. And then just a few months ago, on New Year's Eve, a rusty World War II era bomb washed up on a beach between Santa Cruz and Monterey on the California coast. That's this object in the bottom photo, which turned out to be a Navy practice bomb used during World War II, covered in barnacles and sea debris. So before these contaminated lakes and rivers and coastal areas can be safely returned to public use, it's imperative that detailed underwater surveys are conducted, and any UXO that's present is properly remediated. Now, one of the technologies that's particularly promising for locating these UXO underwater is acoustics. So there's now a need to develop automated detection and classification methods to work with data from these new sonar sensors. And that's precisely the objective in this project. More specifically, we want to develop algorithms that can be used to locate UXO underwater in sonar data when that UXO is either sitting proud on top of the seabed or even when it's buried below the water sediment interface. Because the ultimate goal here is to leverage these methods for actual remediation efforts and expedite the technology transfer, we're developing these algorithms to be compatible with two real sonar systems that have been funded under the SERDP ESTCP portfolio. The first is called the Sediment Volume Search Sonar, or SVSS, developed at Penn State. And the second is the Multi-Sensor Tow Body, or the MUST system, coming out of the Applied Physics Lab at the University of Washington. The SVSS is designed to operate in very shallow water of depths less than 5 meters, while the MUST system is complementary in the sense that it's intended to operate in slightly deeper waters, greater than 5 meters. And to give you a more concrete idea of the types of munitions that we're concerned about finding, it can be anything from small 40-millimeter bullets to larger mortar rounds and projectiles, all the way up to 155-millimeter howitzer shells. And I should point out that these photos are not to scale. We're talking lengths of a couple inches up to a couple feet here for the 155. Now, before we can use our deep learning methods to classify any objects in the data as UXO or just non-UXO harmless clutter, there's an important processing pipeline that needs to be executed. The first step is to actually collect the sonar data. So a platform with the sonar system will go out on the water and execute a survey over an area of interest. As it moves over the area, it's projecting sound down into the water and into the sediment and collecting the raw sonar data returns that bounce back. That raw data then gets converted into sonar imagery using some sophisticated signal processing techniques. And the resulting image data then undergoes a normalization process. Following that, there's an automated detection algorithm that's run. And this is basically flagging potential objects of interest in that larger scene data. And we call these alarms. And these alarms are what the deep learning stage is going to be working with. Now, one of the particularly interesting things about these systems that we're working with is that they are low frequency, downward looking systems. And so they can achieve sound penetration into the sediment and generate 3D volumetric sonar data products. So in the 2D image shown here on the bottom, this is what you might obtain from a side-looking sonar system, which you might be more familiar with. So in this 2D image shown, you have a platform, a side-looking sonar platform looking out to either side. It's projecting sound out to either side and recording the echoes that return from the seafloor. So in the end, you wind up with a 2D sonar image where the lateral dimension is range from the sonar, what's also known as the cross-track direction. And the dimension running up the page is going to be the along-track direction. Now, with the sonar systems that we're dealing with, the SVSS and the MUST, there's going to be a third dimension, which is depth into the sediment. So instead of a 2D image like this, these sensors are actually going to be generating a data cube of 3D volumetric data. Now, it can be challenging to visualize a full 3D data cube. So one common technique to address this is the use of what are called maximum intensity projections, or MIPs. Now, a MIP is just a way to transform a 3D data cube into a 2D representation. And it does this by collapsing one of the axes by retaining only the maximum voxel value in the dimension that's getting collapsed. So for example, suppose we have some 3D data cube as depicted up here on the right. If we take the maximum intensity projection along the depth axis, we're squashing the data cube vertically to obtain a representation in which the only two axes remaining are the along track and cross track. And you would wind up with this grayish horizontal plane at the bottom. And you can repeat this for the other two combinations of axes. And if you display that trio of MIPS in a common reference frame, you would get something like what's shown at the bottom. So you have the along track MIP on the left side, and the cross track MIP along the back. And then along the bottom, you have the depth MIP. So this is just a way to present a 3D data cube in a slightly more manageable way for visualization purposes. But keep in mind that the data we're working with is actually a full 3D data cube that's completely populated. It's not a point cloud. It's not a set of 2D projections. It's a full 3D data product. So when an acoustic wave encounters a boundary between two media characterized by a mismatch in acoustic impedance, it scatters, and the strength of that reflection is determined by the material properties of those two media. And so with this 3D sonar data, you often get very strong returns from one layer in depth. It's usually the water sediment interface, but it need not necessarily be that. And at that strong return, you can obscure other details in the data volume. But by applying a normalization algorithm, you can uncover object responses that were previously hidden, like in the image at the bottom. And once you do that, it's much easier to apply an automated detection algorithm to identify regions of interest that might contain UXO. So as part of this research, we've developed a special data normalization algorithm and also an automated detection algorithm that works with the 3D data volumes, essentially looking for localized areas in the data cube that contain a lot of signal energy. And we can do this very quickly over large data volumes of millions of voxels using some special image processing tricks that leverage a concept called integral images. And importantly, these algorithms we've developed are general enough that they work for both the SVSS system and the MUST system. So I'd like to show some example results of some of these methods. So first, we're going to look at some data from a target field that was laid out in central Pennsylvania by the team developing the SVSS system. And this is called the Foster Joseph Sayers Reservoir. So this is a reservoir that gets drained annually, and this allows the placement of various man-made objects, both buried in a muddy sediment and proud on top of that sediment. Then once the reservoir fills back up with water for the season, the SVSS system can go out on the lake and collect sonar data. So on the bottom here are photographs of some of the objects that were deployed at the site, pre-burial. These are largely metal cylinders and a couple aluminum shot puts. And above each of those photos are the corresponding 3D sonar data cubes shown in this row. And we're presenting them here as before as a trio of maximum intensity projections, since it's of course difficult to display the full 3D volume on a screen like this. So these are what these objects look like in the sonar data. And each of these smaller cubes were automatically detected from the larger 3D scene at the top. And what's interesting here is that you can start to see some elastic returns from some of these objects, which show up as energy deeper below the object, because they arrive later in time than the geometric return from the object itself. And that's one of the clues that some of the classification algorithms we're developing will exploit. And here's an example automated detection of a UXO object over a larger scene collected by the MUST system at a different site in Washington. But again, the algorithm is completely identical. So everything we've discussed so far is just the exposition for our deep learning methods, which is the real heart of our research. And so that brings us to the second half of the processing chain. Once we've identified potential objects of interest with the detector, we'll use labeled data, like from a practice field where we know whether each object is actually UXO or not, to train a deep learning classifier, with the goal being so that we can make correct predictions on new unlabeled data at an actual test site. So the goal, again, is to classify each alarm where we don't know the truth as whether it's UXO or harmless clutter. And we'll go into all these boxes on this slide in more detail during the rest of the talk. Okay, so these days it's nearly impossible to go anywhere without hearing about AI and machine learning and the specific subfield of deep learning as well. These methods are used in everything from facial recognition to medical applications like brain imaging and protein folding, to language-related applications like translation services, and perhaps most famously right now, ChatGPT. And increasingly, for just about any image processing application, the powerful deep learning method known as convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, are used. Now, the proliferation of CNNs has been enabled by the availability of two key resources, computing and data. Whereas traditional machine learning algorithms are going to hit a performance plateau in which beyond a certain point, more data does not improve performance, CNNs can continue to improve as the amount of data increases. As a result, this is a natural way to leverage huge, or at least ever-increasing amounts of experimental data. But there is a catch. If you use too large of a CNN with lots and lots of free parameters to learn, but without a commensurate amount of training data, you can overfit your model to the training data, meaning it will not generalize well when applied to a new set of data, which is the real goal. So there's a balance involved. If you don't have a ton of data, you'll want to employ smaller CNNs. And for the underwater UXO problem with sonar imagery, that's the situation we're in. We have only a tiny fraction of the data that places like Google and Meta have for optical imagery. Now, to understand CNNs, one needs to first be comfortable with that initial letter, the C, in convolutions. So what is a convolution in 1D? So in 1D, what we do is we slide what's called the kernel, or the filter, over our signal, and we effectively weight the input data at each position of the filter. So for a low-pass filter, like shown here on the bottom left, the output is going to be a smooth version of the input signal. Now in 2D, our input signal is now a 2D image, and the filter is also going to be 2D. Again, what we do is we slide that filter all over the input signal, and the result is going to be that certain parts of the image get highlighted. So in the top case here, this filter effectively acts as a horizontal edge detector, producing a large response where the image has horizontal edges. In the bottom case, the filter acts as a vertical edge detector. So different filters will transform the input image in different ways. Now, in a CNN, rather than predefining what those filters should be, the CNN is actually going to automatically learn what those filters should be as part of the training process. So here in this image, we have 6 different filters shown here. And the result of convolving each of them with the input image up here is going to be this set of transformed representations shown in this green box at the bottom. Now, what happens is, within a CNN, each of those transformed representations are going to pass through another set of filters and another, as it goes deeper and deeper into the network. And so you can view this as sort of as a nested functional structure. And each time they go through another layer of filters, the level of abstraction is going to increase. And in turn, the capacity of the algorithm to make complex classification decision boundaries is also going to increase. That's the real power of the CNN. And eventually, after all of this nested filtering, you wind up with a vector of features that acts as a sort of signature or fingerprint for the original image. And as part of the training process, the CNN is also going to learn appropriate weightings on each of those features, which, when combined, will produce a scalar score that indicates how likely the original image was a UXO for this particular application. So at the end of the day, what a CNN is really doing is learning how to map an input image into a single point in some high-dimensional feature space, such that images of UXO in our application are going to be clustered together, and yet also well separated from images of non-UXO. Okay, I know this is a lot to sink in, so I think this is going to be a good place to pause for the first Q&A session. So the first question we have is, how much data do you need to train the model? So that's an excellent question, sort of the million-dollar question. So this is going to really depend on the size of your model that you're using. So as I said, the larger the capacity of your network, the more free parameters you have to learn, the more data that you're going to need to properly train that model. Another consideration to take into account is the variability in the target objects that you're looking for. So if the objects that you're looking for have a lot of variability based on the aspect or the grazing angle, or the sediment that it's located in, you're going to need much more data in order to have data that addresses those different various cases. So it's a combination of many factors, and it's not easy to give a simple one-to-one explanation in terms of how many data points you need.
Thank you, David. We have another question that's come in from the Naval Ordnance Safety and Security Activity, which is a field activity of NASI. How calm do the waters need to be in order to collect the sonar data? And what types of sediments have been evaluated?
Okay, great questions. So in terms of the calmness of the water, that's not really going to affect the sonar data itself. In terms of the safety of the platforms and actually executing the surveys, that can come into play. But once the sensors are collecting the data, provided that there's not perfectly clear water, which is actually counterintuitive, because you can get some multi-path effects that can corrupt your data, especially in shallow waters. But otherwise, the calmness of the water doesn't really come into play very often for collecting the data.
Great, thank you so much. This next question is from the Navy. We have tidal marshlands with mud and very shallow water that contain UXO. Would the sonar scans work in such types of environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know the exact depths that you're talking about, but for example, the SVS system has been run in, I believe, as little as about 1.5 meters depth of water. And so it's really geared toward fewer than 5 meters of water depth. And so it's absolutely intended for cases like this. And it has been run over muddy areas indeed in the past.
Great, thank you so much. This next question is from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Can you generalize your training model to be used in a different environment with seafloor variations, as you mentioned? And is it possible to use the simulation data to train your model for generalization purposes? Yeah.
Okay, great. Those are two excellent questions. The first one, so if we have models trained on data from a certain environment and then move to a new environment with a new seafloor properties, we would hope that the classifiers that we develop are robust enough to transfer to that new environment. If it doesn't directly transfer, the addition or incorporation of a small amount of data from that new site can help refine the classifiers or the classifier weights that we have to make it more appropriate for that new environment. So that's definitely something that is possible.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything?
Could you repeat the second part of that question?
Yes. The second part of the question is it possible to use simulation data to train your model for generalization purposes?
Yes. So in theory, yes, you can use simulated data. The caveat is that you really want to pass through any of that simulated data through the entire identical processing stream, so that there are a lot of signal processing steps that go up before you create the final data product. And with the CNN, it can clue on very minute differences. So if there are certain differences between real data and the simulated data, the CNN could pick up on that and actually learn properties of the simulated data that don't exist in the real data. But provided that you can sufficiently match the simulated data to the real data of a high enough degree of fidelity, then you absolutely could use simulated data. And I think that's going to be one of the next breakthroughs in terms of augmenting the amount of data you have in this scenario, because it's just so expensive to go out to sea and collect enough data to train these algorithms to the degree that you want to. So the idea of simulation is an excellent idea, and I know it's being worked on actively in a few different groups around the country, but I think there's still a little bit of a disconnect in terms of the level of fidelity that's needed in order to make sure that it's essentially indistinguishable from the real data.
Great, thank you. We have two questions that have come in from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The first one is from Erduk. When a different size UXO are present, especially those with greater size differences, does the CNN work well with selecting the filters to apply?
That's an excellent question as well. One of the things, so because of the large diversity in the class of targets that we're interested in finding, it actually, what we do is we use what's called a multi-class CNN. So we treat each of the target types or the classes of targets separately. And this allows us to more finely tailor the algorithm to specific target classes. So rather than just pulling all of the different target types into a single class, like the 40 millimeters and the 81 millimeters, the 155s, rather than pulling all of that into a single class, we actually keep those separated. So we have, in this work, we have 5 different classes of target types based on the size of the munition. And that allows us to learn more specific appropriate filters for each of those different classes. And we found that is actually a quite important thing to do because of that large diversity in target class.
Thank you so much. This next question from the Army Corps: can we expect differences in performance when the training data comes from in situ measurements related or compared to synthetically generated training?
Yeah. So again, this points back to the question of how good the model fidelity of the simulated data is. So if there's always going to be some assumptions and approximations that are made in the simulated data that don't necessarily match the true characteristics of the measured data. So you can expect, because of those differences and discrepancies, there will, in theory, be a drop in performance. There are some things you can do when you're designing your classifiers to try to introduce some robustness so that the generalization performance, despite those differences, can be overcome. But that is definitely something that needs to be addressed, and analysis needs to be executed to understand what those differences are and how the performance could be affected. And I know that is currently a hot topic in a lot of different machine learning applications going on right now, both at Penn State as well as other organizations across the country.
Thank you. And this next question is from NYU. How does sediment variability affect model training?
That's a great question. So currently, we've been pretty limited in terms of the number of different sites from which data has been collected. And so one of the outstanding questions still that remains is how exactly the different sediment types are going to be impacted, how those different sediment types are going to impact the different classifiers, and whether the classifiers that are learned are essentially going to be able to mask the environment in a sense, so that the response is not directly tied to a large degree to what that actual sediment is. So there are different tricks you can play by masking trying to mask the portion of the image that contains an object or the target to try to minimize the effects of the local environment. But you're always going to have some sort of environmental response, especially with the buried objects. And so that is one area that does require a lot more investigation and research.
Great, thank you. This next question is from an anonymous attendee. To get around the scarcity of data, did you try to use other algorithms such as GANs to generate more data for training?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have not resorted to GANs, and one of the reasons for that is that they do not have the physics baked in that we believe is necessary, and so we're dealing with a different modality here, the sonar modality, and especially low frequency, which does not lend itself. There are a lot of special phenomena that are present in this low frequency regime with sonar data that you don't tend to get with optical imagery. So with optical imagery, you can very easily use GANs to generate realistic data pretty easily. Because we have a limited amount of actual sonar data, that makes the GAN process quite difficult, quite challenging. But it is certainly, there have been more recent techniques where there have been physics constraints applied to the GAN process. So forcing the GAN to respect certain physical constraints and properties that we would expect to have from the sonar data, but that's not something that we have explored as of yet. Instead, we've been mainly looking at a sonar simulating a specific sonar modeling tool called POSSUM, which was developed at Penn State. And this is a very powerful tool because it allows us to look at the different system parameters and things like that. And it's because it's physics-based, we know that the physics or the products that come out of that simulator are going to be much more closely tied to the actual physics involved in the problem. But the exploration of using GANs is certainly something that could be explored in the future as well.
Great. And as much as we want you to finish the presentation, one last question before you continue, and this question is from the USGS. Can your approach be applied to identify other stuff in the water column, such as fish?
Yeah, so indeed, these same techniques, the data can identify fish. So oftentimes we see this with side-looking sonar all the time. Fish, because they're moving around, they tend to show up as blurry sources of energy in the imagery. But we can absolutely see the same sorts of phenomena in this 3D data. So yes, you would need to adjust your classifier to change the target class or the type of targets that you're looking for to fish instead of UXO, but the same underlying principles would indeed hold.
Thank you so much. You did a wonderful job with this set of questions. Let's go ahead and finish the presentation. at the presentation, and then at the end, we'll get back to any unanswered questions.
Okay.
Please go
Perfect.
ahead.
Perfect. Okay, so before the Q&A, we were describing CNNs with 2D images, but the same principles are going to hold when you have a 3D volume as input, like we have with this sonar data. So the only difference is that instead of the filters being 2D, like was shown on the top, we're going to have 3D filters, okay? So we can use all of the same techniques for these 3D data products. Now, it's often said that the deep learning methods require large amounts of data, but that's only partially true. As I said before, the key ratio is really going to be the amount of data that you have compared to the number of free parameters to learn in the CNN. So with that insight in mind, because we don't have millions or billions of training data images, we choose to design very, very tiny CNNs. So we're talking on the order of 1,000 parameters rather than millions or billions, like in some of the networks used in optical imagery applications. And one of the advantages of designing these small networks is that we can easily train several models with different architectures relatively quickly, and then use the power of the ensemble to improve performance and robustness. Because different CNNs with different architectures are going to uncover and leverage different clues in the data to make decisions, they can act in a complementary manner. So an ensemble prediction, where you simply average the individual predictions, can often outperform any individual CNN. And that's exactly what we observed with the SVSS data when we conducted some experiments. So we had one set of data, training data, that was used to learn all the parameters in the CNNs we designed. And then we take those trained CNNs and apply them to a new disjoint set of data, the test data, and evaluate performance on that holdout set. And these are the results of that process for the data from the Foster Joseph Sayers Reservoir site described earlier in Pennsylvania. So by using an ensemble, one need not necessarily worry about picking the single best architecture for the CNN. You can just throw a few different architectures at the problem and simply average those results, and you can perform better than any of those single CNNs in this particular case. So that was based on CNNs using 3D image domain data. But given the relatively low resolution nature of this low frequency data, often clutter objects can look very similar to target objects in the image domain. And so this is going to motivate the use of alternative data representations for performing classification. So you can see here, for example, this clutter object in green, a scuba tank. This can look in the sonar imagery much like the 81mm mortar shown here in pink, based on some aspects, and it could also look like this 155mm howitzer shell at other aspects. Okay, so you can see here's a scuba tank example, very similar to the 81mm. Another view of the scuba tank at a different aspect, and again, that looks very similar to the howitzer in this particular case. So the image domain alone isn't necessarily going to give us the level of performance that we want. Okay, so what sort of alternative data representations can we actually create? One of those representations is what's called acoustic color, which expresses the target response as a function of aspect and frequency. So depending on the angle at which you ensonify the object, the signal that comes back can be very different. For example, hitting this UXO at broadside, this red arrow, you can obtain a very detailed telling fingerprint of the object. So that's what's shown over here in the red. But if we happen to hit it obliquely, like the black arrow here, those identifying clues might be absent. And so as a result of that, classification can be very challenging. So sometimes you get a lucky look and you have a lot of information, a lot of rich information and signature in the resulting acoustic color plot. Sometimes you're unlucky in the angle that you happen to look at the object at. And then there's going to be many fewer clues to perform successful classification. Now, with the downward-looking systems, like the SVSS and the MUST, there's also going to be a large grazing angle dependence, which is a major difference from side-looking sonars, for which for which the response doesn't change much over the range of typical grazing angles. So here on the right is an example of this for this UXO object on the bottom. So what's shown here and here is the theoretical free field response for this object at two different grazing angles relevant for the systems that we're working with. So why is this relevant? Well, this is going to speak to the large variability in the responses of the objects in the sonar data. There's going to be dependence on aspect, dependence on frequency, on grazing angle, on burial status, on the surrounding sediment that the object is in. All of these things are going to impact and alter how a given object appears in the imagery. And the greater that variability, the more data that's going to be needed to span all of those different cases if we want to train a robust classifier. Okay, so our 3D image domain representation up here, it's actually a complex valued product. It's just that we typically look only at the magnitude component and we simply throw away the phase. But we can take that complex data and derive other alternative frequency-based representations, like the 3D acoustic color, for example. So we can look at the magnitude of that, or we can look at the phase of that, and we could also create a product that we call the phase gradient, which applies a gradient or a difference operator on the phase data. And this allows us to eliminate some of the phase wrapping effects that make certain clues more accessible to the network in the process. So this bottom row over here, these are the spectral representations that are all derived from this original image on the upper left, at least the complex valued version of it. In fact, beyond those base representations, we can also derive additional representations, additional alternatives by taking maximum intensity projections across different dimensions. So the idea here is that we can reduce the size of our data products to ease the training data requirements. But hopefully we can also better understand where the discriminatory information is located in the data. For example, do we really need to retain the whole frequency dependence? Or do we really need to retain all of the aspect dependence of the response? Or can we condense it via maximum intensity projection? So here are a few examples of what some of these data representations look like for different objects. So from left to right, we have a 155 millimeter howitzer shell. We have an 81 millimeter mortar. We have a 40 millimeter bullet. And then we have a clutter object, which is a scuba tank. So this is not a UXO. This is the confuser class, you can say. And so the top row here are showing the 3D image magnitude of each of these objects. In the middle row, we're showing the 3D acoustic color magnitude. And then at the bottom, we're showing the 3D acoustic color phase gradient. Okay. But we need to keep in mind that each of these are actually fully populated 3D volumes. We're just presenting them here as a trio of MIPS for ease of visualization. So what we're going to do is take these various data representations and we're going to train CNNs for each of them. Because depending on the object, different representations might contain better clues for classification. Moreover, for a given representation, we're also going to design multiple CNNs, each with a unique architecture, so that we can employ an ensemble with an eye toward improving the robustness of our predictions. And finally, if we happen to have multiple looks on the same object, for example, from different survey passes at different aspects, we're going to leverage all of those looks as well. So again, rather than using only the image domain image as input to a CNN, we're going to build CNNs for each of these different types of imagery or different types of representations. Now, the idea of multi-look classification is particularly vital because not all views are going to be equally informative. If you happen to have an image of a target at an unlucky aspect, the physics might simply be absent for discriminating against clutter in that case. So on the bottom here, we're showing 5 different looks at the same object, a 155 millimeter howitzer shell. And you can see some of those looks or views appear to be much more useful than others. It just depends on how you happen to ensonify the object, whether you get a favorable aspect or an unlucky look. Okay, so next we're going to look at some performance of these deep learning methods we've developed on data collected at a demonstration site in Squim Bay in Washington State. So here's Seattle, and then Squim Bay is up here. Now, this was an official SERDP testbed prepared by the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, PNNL. So PNNL seeded the site with inert UXO targets and non-target clutter items, both in what's called a calibration line. So you can see that here in blue, as well as a blind area, which is this magenta circle. So the items in the calibration line, so on the calibration line, these contain objects for which the positions of those objects and the true identities were provided to the performers. And in the blind area, they were not disclosed. So the general process here during this experiment was that the APL MUST team conducted surveys in the area and beamformed the raw sonar data into 3D scenes. And then they kindly provided that data to us to work with. And you can see on the top right what some of these targets and clutter objects that were deployed look like. So what does the processing chain look like once we get that scene imagery? So we're going to start by running our automated detection algorithm on all of that data. And this is going to generate candidate alarms that need to be investigated further. Then we're going to extract the various aforementioned data representations for each of those alarms. And because the calibration data was labeled in that we knew the true identity of each alarm, this is what we're going to use to train our CNN classifiers. And remember, we're training these CNNs for all of those different data representations. So the image domain and the various spectral domain representations. And then we take those learned classifiers and apply them to the alarms from the blind data, from the blind area. And based on the predictions of those CNNs, we rank the alarms in what's known as a dig list, with the idea being that those alarms at the top of the list are expected to be most UXO-like. So you would attend to them first, while those on the other end of the list can be safely ignored as harmless clutter, thereby saving time and money in the process. So later, the true locations of the alarms in the blind set get revealed. And at that time, we can start to examine our classification performance. And one of the things we found was that the different data representations indeed provide complementary information, and using them jointly improves performance over relying on a single, reliance solely on the image domain representation or only the acoustic color representation. So on the right side here, we're showing the performance of each of those individual representations, the 3D acoustic color magnitude, the 3D acoustic color phase gradient, the 2D image magnitude, which was formed by taking a maximum intensity projection in depth, and the full 3D image magnitude. And we're also showing the ensembles from using multiple representations jointly. And I should mention that these are the multi-look results, meaning when we have multiple views of the same object, we're pulling all of those views together. And then in the particular approach that we have found works best, we use only the maximum score from that set. So essentially we're picking out the single best, cleanest look to make decisions. However, that look that does get selected is allowed to vary from representation to representation, because what's the best look in the image domain might be totally different from what's the best look in the acoustic color domain, for example. Okay, and then the figure on the left here, what this is showing is the different multi-look strategies. For example, if you were going to use the mean or the median score of the multi-look set instead of the max, those correspond to the green and the blue and the red curves. And then also for comparison, the single look performance is shown in black. So this is when each individual view gets treated independently. So you can see that there's a tremendous performance gain from leveraging the multiple looks. And one of the nice things about the fact that the CNNs we design are so small is that we can start to examine the filters that are learned to start teasing apart what roles they are playing and what features they seem to be keying on. Because in this case, we've designed our CNNs to use only 4 filters per convolutional layer, rather than hundreds or thousands, which is more typical. And we can also examine how the data gets transformed through the networks at intermediate stages to try to understand what specific attributes are being leveraged in making the classification decisions. For example, one of the things we discovered was that some of the CNNs were exploiting elastic effects like ringing that are present for some of the targets. That was a phenomenon being leveraged during the classification process. Okay, so this project is still ongoing. We're about 2/3 of the way through, but here are some of the key takeaways we've gotten from our research thus far. Perhaps most importantly, sonar, we found, and we believe, is indeed a viable modality for buried underwater UXO. And we've been able to develop automated methods that can successfully detect and classify UXO at high probabilities with low false alarm rates. And importantly, the use of these novel complementary data representations, as well as leveraging multiple looks of objects, has been vital to achieve that. And in fact, the insights gained from using these multiple looks really points toward a concept of operations. When you're doing remediation at a site, you really want to execute surveys at different orientations, like cross-hatching your area multiple times at different aspects, because that's going to improve your odds of getting a very telling, informative look with a very strong, distinctive signature of the potential UXO. And this brings us to the final main slide of content. So how does this work benefit the DoD? First, it provides automated detection and classification algorithms that are tailored to real systems. And these methods are repeatable and scalable. So we can basically remove the need for a human subject matter expert inside the loop. The techniques also provide a way to quickly analyze large volumes of data. And in fact, these large volumes of data that would be very challenging for a human to sift through, given the 3D nature of them. And lastly, the results on the blind test so far have suggested that the methods can save time and money during remediation by minimizing the number of inspections of harmless clutter. And I should add that we're currently in the process of sharing all of these algorithms that we've developed with our collaborators at the University of Washington, so they can fold them directly into their processing pipeline with the MUST system if they wish to. And so if you are interested in learning more, you can visit the project website, where you can find an interim report with many more details that I had to gloss over during this brief talk. Or you can, of course, reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to discuss any of this work. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'd be more than happy to field any questions you may have in the final Q&A session.
Great, thank you so much. The next question, or the first question for this section, is from UCF. What kind of ensemble learning method did you use to synthesize a different source classification output? Can you elaborate on that?
Can you repeat that? The fourth classification? I didn't quite follow.
What kind of ensemble learning method did you use to synthesize the different source classification outputs?
So in this case, the ensembles are just a very basic approach, where we're simply averaging the predictions from each of the different representations. So we are using the maximum prediction for each individual network, but then we're just simply combining them with a simple mean in that case.
Great. The next question has to do with false negatives. Could there be false negative detections using your method? And if yes, how can they be eliminated?
Yes, absolutely. So no classifier is going to be perfect. And so there are some, there will be indeed cases where you have a false negative. So when there is a target, but you believe it is a harmless clutter, and that's really a bad, that's a bad error that you want to make for obvious reasons. So one of the ways to try to minimize the occurrence of those is to have these multiple looks at different orientations to make sure that you insanify the objects of interest at the optimal aspect. So if you only have a single look, you might get unlucky, and the physics just might not be there, and so that's often the case where you run into issues. Another case where the false negatives come into play is that a lot of the smaller munitions are very difficult to detect. They're simply smaller. They have weaker target strength. Some of them are on the order of the resolution cell of some of these sensors, and so there's going to be a fundamental limit in terms of which types of objects you can indeed classify with sufficient fidelity. But I would say that the trying to survey at multiple aspects and using that multi-view approach is going to be your best bet to guard against false negatives.
Great, thank you. All right, this next question has to do with training the classifiers. How long does it take to do so in the ensemble method?
Yep. So because these are because the CNNs are so small, with a single GPU, you can train one of these in a matter of hours. And in fact, because they're so small, you could actually you can train a few of them in parallel. So there's not a lot of training time involved because of the small nature of these classifiers.
Thank you. And this next question, that was, by the way, from Arizona State University, and this next question is from Oscilla Power. Do you know if there's a list of UXO sensor groups that can be made available for collaborative purposes?
I don't know about a list, but I'd be happy to, if you contact me, I can provide you with at least a list of the people that I know that are funded through SERDP and ESTCP. There are a handful, so I'd be happy to follow up with you on that if you just reach out to me.
Thank you. And as a reminder, you can download a copy of the slides. The link to download a copy of the slides has been dropped in the chat box. And when you download them, David's contact information is there if you want to take this discussion offline. All right, this next question is from PNNL. What is the running time of your entire data processing pipeline and ensemble CNNs? Mm-hmm. And do you believe that this could be run in real time in the field at some point in the future?
Excellent question. So currently, once the data has been beamformed into the imagery, so the 3D scene imagery, the normalization and detection algorithms are pretty much real time already, and they're currently just coded in MATLAB, so there's not really any optimization in terms of speed, but those are very, very fast, and so I'm pretty sure that they could be run in near real time or in an embedded situation, or slightly slower than real time. For the classification stage, the main the main time-consuming part for that is actually doing the training process. But once the classifiers are trained, the evaluation is basically instantaneous. So that can certainly be, once you have the classifiers trained, actually getting the predictions are basically for free. Currently, one of the more time-consuming portions of the pipeline is extracting the various representations, because there's a lot of signal processing that has to go behind the scenes to get those representations extracted. But currently the normalization and the detection are basically in real time, and then if you already have the classifiers trained, the evaluation, so getting the predictions, are also in real time. So I would say the current bottleneck is speeding up the extraction of the different features. Excuse me, the extraction of the different representations. But there are certainly ways that we can accelerate that process as well. So I believe a real-time implementation in an embedded sort of situation is definitely feasible in the near future, if there is a desire to make that happen.
Great, thank you so much, David. A few more questions before we wrap up. Can you restate the advantages of using an automated process instead of having a human expert find the UXO? So maybe some takeaway messages that we can reinforce here.
Sure. So two of the strong advantages of having the automated process is the scalability and the repeatability. So if you don't have a human trying to go through all of the data, if you run the same algorithm on the same set of data, you're going to get the same result every time. So that repeatability in terms of quality assurance, I believe, is important. And then just the fact that the data is the 3D nature of the data, it's very difficult to sift through that data visually. You can take some maximum intensity projections, but you can very easily overlook some things in that process because you're losing information for the sake of visualization purposes. So I think the fact that you can have scalability and repeatability in terms of those automated processes, as well as the fact that you don't need to have a human subject matter expert in the loop. So, but by taking that human nature, that human aspect out of the timeline, I think you can really accelerate the process, as well as the fact that if you don't have a human in the loop, you can actually start to do some adaptive surveying and things like that with an embedded system. So you can sort of compress the operational timeline, although that's not necessarily a critical component for the UXO remediation compared to, for example, MCM, where there's more time constraints. It does allow you a level of flexibility to accelerate the surveys and the missions and things like that, and you can really come away with you can conduct a survey and then come away with a good picture, a quick snapshot of the level of density, at least, of potential alarms that you might need to be dealing with in the future.
Great, thank you so much, David, for an extremely engaging presentation, and you did so well with the Q&A session. We're going to go ahead and wrap up, but before we do so, do you have any parting thoughts that you want to share with our audience before we conclude?
I would just want to say thank you again, all of you, for attending, and these questions were actually quite excellent. You really hit on all of the critical components and critical aspects of the research. So hopefully you got a lot out of the session. And again, thank you, Rola, for hosting this, and for SERDP for supporting this research.
Wonderful. Thank you again, David. And just a last reminder for our audience, these webinars happen roughly every 2 weeks. The next one is actually on May 2nd, and it will feature DoD-funded research efforts on developing technologies focusing on PFAS destruction. This webinar on May 2nd will feature 2 speakers, Dr. Mike Wong from Rice University and Dr. Dave Major from Savron. As a reminder, you can visit the SERDP and ESTCP webinar webpage to register for this and for the MR July webinar, and actually for webinars through the end of this year. And before we conclude, I would like to remind you that both the audio and a copy, a YouTube video of today's session will be archived on our webinar webpage in case you'd like to refer to them in the future. And we would appreciate it at this time if you can please take a moment to complete the survey that will pop up on your screen. This concludes today's webcast. Thank you so much for joining us.